Hello, my name is Neil Kleinberg. I'm the founder and CEO of Deliver, and today we bring to you the Entrepreneurial Essentials overview. Here's my full bio, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like to read it. But the important thing to note is that I've built, run, and scaled 4 companies of my own, and I've been involved in many other transactions, both on the buy side and the sell side, wearing inventors and advisor hats. So I have enough scars that hopefully I can help you avoid them. The purpose of this overview is so that continuously learning entrepreneurs can get assistance in building, running, and scaling their new companies as part of their exit strategy. It's targeted at executives leading fast growth companies with highly differentiated business ideas that most likely will need capital from outside fundraising sources to achieve their desired growth rates. This is my favorite definition of entrepreneurship, the intersection of fear versus ambition. And here's a few popular reasons to become an entrepreneur that I've noticed over the years. The first is to gain independence, in theory, if you're your own boss. The second is to make a lot of money. And the third is to change the world. And time has shown that it's very difficult to do the first two, and expectations are often not quite met. But changing the world remains an ambition worth pursuing. So let's discuss your new business idea. First of all, the business idea should have 2 parts. The first part is a solution to some customer problem in a market, and preferably that market has lots of customers. The second part is the company needed to deliver that solution to its customers within that market. And just for clarification purposes, a company is not the same as a business. Within our context, a company refers to the for-profit legal enterprise in its entirety, whereas the business is just a subset of the company. Namely, it's the sustainable ongoing portion of a company that generates a profit by selling solutions to paying customers. So the part 1 solution typically consists of a combination of hardware software products, namely the tools, consulting services, professional labor, analytics data, content, or some bundled package of each of those components. And the potential customers of your solution generally fall into 2 broad categories: consumers, in which case you would be a business to consumer or B2C company, or you sell to other businesses, in which case you'd be a business to business company. And there's 2 variations of the B2B theme, namely selling to governments and not-for-profits. The second part of the business idea refers to how you position your company within a hierarchy of market segments. And in the middle, you'll see we've got a hierarchy which consists of sectors, subsectors, industries, sub-industries, domains, ultimately down to solution categories that your company should fit into. And that's typically called the microenvironment, or your company space. But be aware that on the right-hand side, there's also a macro environment out there with forces that often are beyond your control, but you still need to be aware of, monitor them, and potentially react to them. And that's typically referred to as your surroundings. Now, let's talk about Deliver's brass tacks. BRASS, it stands for Building, Running, and Scaling Science, and brass tacks refers to the entrepreneurial essentials for building, running, and scaling your company. So we think it's an ideal approach for fast growth companies that anticipate being involved with multiple mergers and acquisitions, or M&A transactions, as they progress through a variety of growth stages, while wearing various hats. And when I'm talking about growth stages, the journey typically is broken down into 4 growth stages: startup, emerging, established, and market leading. Startup companies typically care most about establishing feasibility for their technology, often manifests itself in a prototype solution. Emerging companies are interested in establishing the viability of the business. So typically there's a finished product involved and paying customers, at least some of them. And if you get to established status, step 3, that's where your company is really interested in sustainability, namely a track record of predictable revenue and profit, for example. And if you're lucky enough to get to market leading status in step 4, and hopefully you have a hockey stick-like growth curve to get there, then that implies you have sufficient differentiators so that you can charge higher prices and and achieve higher profits, and that's prosperity. So you'll notice there's two different colors of growth underneath the curve, and the yellow represents organic growth, which is generally associated with growing based on your internal resources, and that's a good thing to have strong organic growth no matter what stage you're at for the life of your company. But when you get big enough, namely established, and that's what the dotted line is, you can also grow through other means, namely inorganic growth or M&A growth, and ideally you'll have both options available to you. Growing often requires assistance at many levels, and we have this Sherpa model where depending on your backgrounds and experiences, you can get a variety of different types of assistance, education, training, coaching, mentoring, advising, and perhaps directing, all the way at the top if you're on a board of directors that has fiduciary responsibility. So it's a very serious thing, and to get to the top of the mountain, it takes a lot of help along the way, often from different sources. So be aware that the journey requires assistance. In order to build, run, and scale a company, we strongly recommend that you adopt some overarching business excellence framework, and that's in our approach a 4-phase approach where planning, execution, reporting, and updating are all integrated. You've probably heard of planning and execution, but for high growth companies, you need to add the 2 additional steps, reporting and updating. So let's talk a little bit about that. Planning, usually the output is a comprehensive business plan and investor package, where you establish business success criteria, which ultimately can be measured to see how you're performing. When you get to execution, that's typically a tactical term where projects are done by people and or tools, and they are periodic. When you get to the 3rd phase, reporting, that's more of a strategic view where you take an enterprise-wide view, typically through a scorecard, about all the different projects that were executed, and it all roll up into an aggregated enterprise-wide view. And last but not least, the 4th phase, update. Because the market changes and your company may change internally, you always have to have a feedback loop to the original baseline plan to make adjustments as necessary. So we think you need all 4 of those things to succeed. Here's a little insight into the visibility and accountability that we talked to from the business plan. You'll notice in the middle column, the business success criteria are defined as vision, mission, goals, objectives with key performance indicators, so you can measure them, all the way down to tactical solution delivery requirements. But assignment is also required. Namely, you need to assign a group or a person at the enterprise, organization, department, or individual who's responsible for meeting those business success criteria. So alignment and assignment are both required to be successful as part of the business excellence framework. Now let's talk about the global marketplace in which your company is going to grow. So when we say global marketplace, we refer to the world's collection of markets where buyers and sellers meet to exchange things of value. And relative to the buyer-seller relationship as they relate to markets, there's 2 types of buyers and sellers that we'll talk about. One is buyers and sellers of solutions, and this is general economics, supply and demand type of conversation where the solution consists of products, services, and data. And the second type is buyers and sellers of enterprises, and that's where mergers and acquisitions or M&A comes into place. So if you're looking at the picture on the bottom and you're a seller, you could be wearing 2 different hats at any given time. On the right-hand side, you could be selling your solution to customers, consumers. On the other hand, you could be receiving funding from investors and financiers to help you grow. So let's discuss fundraising, which is an M&A transaction-related process where your company, the seller, tries to convince the buyer, namely an investor or financier, to provide additional capital into your company so you can grow faster. 2 of the most common type of M&A transactions are financial transactions, where the funding source is a financial services industry firm, and the second type is a strategic transaction where the funding comes from a company in the same or similar industry. And the funds may be provided to your company in exchange for equity, debt, or a combination thereof, but the buyer definitely expects a certain return on investment from the seller, consistent with their risk-reward deal thesis. So here's 4 common scenarios for the seller based on the 4 growth stages: startup, emerging, established and market leading. The first type for startups is generally referred to as seed funding in the $50K up to $1 million range. And the second is the emerging enterprises, and that's where the domain of the venture capital or VC firms come into place. And typically they write checks in many series, and it can range from $1 million up to $20 million. And then the third stage is for the established enterprise, where that's the domain of the private equity firms or PE firms, and they like to write checks in the $20 to $50 million range. And if you get to the promised land with an initial public offering, then more than likely you're going to require the service of a global investment bank with funds and underwriting capability. These are just scenarios. There's gaps and bluebird exceptions to everything, but these represent sort of guidelines for how you can progress up the growth curve. I should warn you that the odds are against you. Here's some interesting statistics from the venture capital world, and it shows just how few companies are even attractive to the VCs, and how few of them, even if they're attractive and they get funded, succeed. So it's definitely a very difficult thing to do. So we just want to make you aware that there are many obstacles, and you'll need your Sherpas all along the journey. So how does a seller increase the odds of getting funded by a buyer? Basically, you need two things. You need a great business plan, which is an internal facing document meant for everybody in the company to contribute to and understand, with the possible exception of sensitive salary information. But you also need a great investor package, which is a collection of documents externally facing to the ones you want to ask to write your checks. And usually the investor package includes some investor executive summaries and the all popular investor pitch deck. So they should be related, these two sets of documents, so you can cut and paste bidirectionally with the same names and titles and headings, and not have to reinvent the wheel each time. So hopefully you'll put both of these things together to make a compelling story. So thank you. That's our overview. If you have any questions, you can contact me at this phone number or email address. Have a nice day.